Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Sean Grundy. I'm co-founder and CEO of Bevi. Bevi makes smart water machines for offices. So we make machines that provide regular, purified, sparkling, and flavored water on demand. And we're currently in thousands of offices throughout the US and Canada and growing quite quickly. We actually have a competitive product here, but if that weren't there, we'd be a great fit for this office. But this is now on my prospect list. Bevi's an environmental company. We exist to take all the drinks that people would otherwise get in single-use disposable plastic bottles or single-use aluminum cans, and we make it possible to get all those same beverages without wasting a single-use container. The reason this is so important is that today 30 to 50 billion plastic bottles a year end up in the landfill. In the US, only about 30% of plastic bottles get recycled, and internationally the rates are much worse than that. And more we keep hearing about microplastics in our water. We keep hearing about rivers and even the most pristine places in the world, like everywhere from literally like the deep ocean trenches to lakes all around us polluted by plastic. And Bevi exists to at least take the plastic from the beverage supply chain out of the environment. You realize that plastic bottles are so pointless when you study the industry and you learn that most of the bottled water out there today is actually just filtered tap water. It's not like anything amazing or any special spring water. It's just filtered tap water, but instead of getting filtered in the taps all around us, it's filtered in a plant, packaged in single-use plastic, and then it's even more environmentally wasteful because there's a lot of fuel that gets used trucking beverages from the bottling plant to wherever they're ultimately consumed. And that, by the way, is the case for pretty much every beverage beyond water as well. Like if you look at almost every soda or a lot of juice products or energy drinks out there, they're basically 99% filtered tap water and 1% other stuff. And when we started Bevi, we had the idea that you should never ship water. You should only ship at a maximum the 1% of other ingredients, which are flavorings and in some cases preservatives or CO2, and always source your tap water locally. So we built these IoT machines that purify tap water, store different beverage ingredients in them, and then track exactly when is the right time to restock each ingredient and let people create custom beverages at the point of use. So anything from regular water to various flavored drinks. So that's what Bevi does, but I'm actually here today to talk about a pretty specific topic that I hope is relevant to most people here, and that's distributing a hardware product, and in particular, distributing an IoT product. And I think there are some really specific challenges in hardware when it comes to distribution, and we've definitely had to figure out a lot on our own, so I'm hoping that the talk today saves you guys some of the hassle that we've been through. So let's see, I'll try to make it useful. So we started off in Boston about 4 years ago. Like we incorporated 6 years ago, but we started going to market in mid-2015. And initially, our first thought was literally to do everything ourselves, not because that was our core competency or like the most sensible business model for us, but we were always thinking in the beginning, literally like 1 month or maybe at most 1 quarter at a time. So the goal was always like get 1 machine in the market. And then once we did that, get 10 machines in the market. And pretty naturally, we started off doing that right where we lived. We were selling and distributing machines in Boston, and we honestly weren't thinking from the beginning about like how do you create a kind of scalable infrastructure. We were more just thinking like, let's hit whatever growth numbers will let us raise a seed round. So we started off both selling machines ourselves, and we sell them B2B, like initially to big tech companies and now to really kind of thousands of companies across industries. And beyond selling them, our machines require ongoing service. So somebody has to, first of all, install the machine. If it breaks, someone has to maintain it. Someone needs to deliver new filters and new CO2 and new beverage ingredients as needed. And in the beginning, we just did all of that ourselves because really, like, who else was going to do it? Like we talked to a few of the big food and beverage distributors out there and a few of the big food service companies, but in our early stages, no one really, except for a handful of maybe startups in the space, no one really cared about us, and I don't blame them. Our direct service was really valuable early on, and I would honestly recommend going to market direct for a lot of companies out there because it helped us empathize with the people who eventually became our distributors, and it helped us learn a ton about how do you actually support a product in the market. It helped us learn what worked well and what worked badly with our product. Like, it gave us all sorts of data about what was breaking, what parts were very reliable, all the information that if we had just sold through typical food and beverage channels would have been kind of harder to obtain. But very quickly we realized we couldn't take over the world with this beverage product trying to do everything ourselves, especially with very limited capital. And like kind of the two main constraints we came up with or we ran into, one was really just geographic coverage. Like in every market we operated in, we needed technicians. So we needed kind of trained people on the ground who knew how to install and maintain machines. And then we also needed trucks and warehouses to store our machines and to store our concentrate. And that gets expensive really fast. So we actually started off going to market direct in 3 cities, in like Boston, New York, and San Francisco. And then by mid-2016, we realized like, there's no way we have enough money to do this. And we could have maybe been extremely limited geographically and only launched in 1 city at a time, but we were getting a lot of pressure from our early customers to expand. Basically, as we pitched larger and larger clients, we were hearing, we like your product, we want to go with you, but we want standardized kitchens across the country, so you need to provide your product to us everywhere. And in order to win the deal, we needed to figure out how to do that quickly. The other thing we ran into was really just a shortage of relationships. Like, we realized there were other companies out there, namely large food and beverage food service companies, that already had contacts at all of the largest companies. Like, if you want to get into a Fortune 500 company, it's a lot easier to do that through Aramark or Sodexo or Compass Group or a multi-billion-dollar company that already has contracts and has already, been an approved vendor of these companies for decades. It's a lot easier to do it through them than it is to do it directly. And we actually started hearing from a lot of customers, like, we will not work with you. Like, we want your product, but we will not work with you until you have a deal with Aramark or until you have a deal with Compass Group. So those were the situations we were running into. I also, by the way, I'm using a lot of Game of Thrones references tonight. And I'm doing it because a lot of people talk about like how hard hardware is. Like, hardware is hard and IoT is hard. And I've used this like over the years as a reminder to myself that like GOT, trying to survive in GOT is a lot harder than IoT. And especially getting through the last season, getting through season 8 of GOT is a lot harder than doing this. So when we started looking into distribution, the initial question came up like, what exactly do we distribute? Like, what elements of our business do we outsource versus what do we continue to do in-house? And distribution gets used, the word gets used to apply to 2 very different areas of business, and I feel like it's worth clarifying the 2. One is really sales. Like, there are distributors out there that don't actually physically touch your product. All they do is connect buyers and sellers. Like they basically help get buyers to purchase your product. And that's where the relationship element comes in. And then there's also like the physical service. And in our industry, distributors play an enormous role in physically installing and maintaining machines and showing up at clients every day or every week. And again, that's like a very different kind of distribution. We assessed early on, like, what could we scale? like with limited resources and the kind of funding we were planning to raise, what could we scale versus what would we just simply not be able to scale? And what we found is we could definitely scale sales. Like, we're headquartered in Boston. We can do a lot of selling out of Boston, with the one limiting factor that there are these big, like, Fortune 500 firms that we really can't access without a partnership. But other than that, we could pretty much build a brand and we could sell without anyone's help. And even from the beginning, we saw good traction doing that. But then the service side, we just absolutely could not scale. Like there's no way. We were turning down business, really turning down revenue left and right, just because we didn't have the capability of setting up a warehouse and hiring a technician and providing service in so many states. And even today, it's the same way in so many countries. We just can't scale because we don't have the distribution set up. And then realizing that, we started looking at who could provide the service, basically like who could fill in the gaps here. And we found three major kinds of distributors. One is basically office coffee service companies, and these are the companies, like even looking here, the companies that provide beverages, snacks, tea, coffee. That's one whole realm of companies out there. Another one is just water cooler companies that typically provide delivery both to homes and to offices. And they tend to have a lot less technical support infrastructure. They're much more like dropping off water coolers and providing filter changes maybe twice a year. Whereas we found like the kind of office coffee service companies were more hands-on. And then lastly, there are these kind of technical staffing firms that do all sorts of work around the office, and you can just pay them to do that. And the benefit of these guys, we were really only looking for a service partner, not a sales partner. The benefit of these guys is that we could retain client relationships and only pay them to do outsourced service. That's so we thought. Although what we found out pretty quickly as we started exploring economics of the industry, we couldn't afford them. Like the only companies that we could kind of economically viably work with in this space were companies that wanted to own client relationships, meaning that they would actually sell our product to the end customer. They would own that customer on their income statement, and then they would buy or lease our product from us. So we ended up going to market with this mix of really office coffee service companies and water cooler companies. What happened, we started working with distributors in mid-2016, and very quickly they took over our business. So very quickly there was this swing where over the course of about a year, they went from being maybe 20% of our business to 50% of our business, and then as time went on, they're now closer to 60-70% of our business. And in the beginning, we were honestly not very disciplined about which distributors we worked with. So if someone wanted to work with us, we're like, oh, awesome, you want to sell Bevi? We want to sell Bevi too, perfect. Like, come sell our product. And what ended up happening is we quickly signed up over 40 distributors across the country. Many of them we never trained. We just sort of signed them up, sent them some machines, and realized like they slipped and we never trained them. Some of them serviced our machines extremely well and did a great job of building our brand. Others serviced our machines terribly and like really hurt our brand, because when something was wrong with the machines, it's never viewed as, oh, this distributor's not doing a good job. It's viewed as like, hey, this product doesn't work. So that was a problem we ran into. And that ended up, by the way, really aggravating the distributors that were doing a good job of service, because they felt like, why are you working with both of us? Like, why are you working with our competitor who doesn't take good care of your product when we're putting so much effort into it? And then the other thing we saw that was really surprising is some of the distributors we really expected to drive growth, like the big ones, often ones that had like a lot of clientele, didn't actually promote our product at all. And in some of these cases, it was very disappointing. Whereas in other cases, sometimes when we expected it, sometimes we didn't, they were amazing and just like really quickly growing our sales. So anyway, that was kind of interesting, and we were surprised by it. Like, and I think part of the reason we were surprised is we just didn't put a lot of thought into it in advance. And what I'd say I learned here, and actually one of the people that helped me think about this a lot was one of our advisors who was CEO of Keurig for a decade. is that the same way everyone does an ideal customer profile, it's really important to do an ideal distributor profile. Like, it's basically the same thing. Like, when you're selling through distributors, they are essentially the customer, and it's super critical to assess them and be really thoughtful about who to distribute through, the same way you would be critical about who are you selling to and kind of in what order. And just like some of the questions I put up here that we think about when assessing who are the right distributors, one is really just like, how do they compete in the market? Like, are they competing on quality or are they competing on cost? And from our perspective, as an early stage product that wasn't super reliable, and in the beginning and maybe even today breaks more than it should, we really needed the distributors that valued service quality, and we're going to help build our brand, and we're willing to put in a little extra time to take care of the product, whereas the distributors competing on cost and kind of like being a lower cost service, we're in many cases devaluing our brand and doing absolutely as little service and support as possible. Another area to figure out is, are they selling your product, or are they interested in selling your product offensively or defensively? Like, are these guys in growth mode, and are they using your product to land new accounts and get in with something differentiated and upsell? Or are they using your product to be able to stop their competitors from doing that, like from poaching their accounts? Like, are they just trying to say, oh, this client's trying to get in with Bevi, or this distributor's trying to get in with Bevi, don't worry about it, I can provide that too. And that could be the case. Like, they may only want to provide your product reactively, but never lead with it. And then one other area which we really undervalued in the beginning, but has come to be critically important, is culture fit. Like, the same way distributors are this weird entity, because they're partly a customer and they're partly like an extension of your team. And the same way you'd want someone selling your product to be the right culture fit, they're out there selling your product. You really need them to kind of mesh with your team and align with your values. And some of the cases we've struggled with the most are with distributors that for example, sell tons of plastic bottles and cans and really don't actually care about our environmental mission. Like we found that can lead to major clashes and just a lack of understanding between the teams. And so much of the success of a distribution partnership is just the sales teams seeing eye to eye and respecting each other and getting along. And then just some other notes I had are that there are distributors that could be the right fit for you eventually, but maybe aren't the right fit today. And what I look at there is like, how meaningful will your percent of revenue, will the percent of revenue you contribute, how meaningful will that be to them? And like, are they actually actively trying to grow, or are they more in a phase where they've like slowed down and are just trying to retain their accounts? And I guess another way to look at it is just the same way that we mapped out our core competencies and the areas we were weak, we were really looking for someone who was the opposite of that. And we've ended up going through this phase where we've actually, like, first of all, started off expanding with tons of distributors and ended up winding down, where now we have like fewer distributors, but ones that are super well aligned, either on the water cooler side or the office coffee side. I wanted to just quickly throw in a few other points that really should be part of a distribution strategy, things we didn't know in the beginning, and then I'll very quickly wrap up. And a big part of every distribution strategy should be, are you prioritizing a customer pull or a distributor push? Meaning, like, are you expecting your distributors to go out there and actively sell your product, or are you building a brand with end customers and expecting those end customers to insist that your distributor provide it? And in an ideal world, you do both, but I think it's very hard to put equal weight behind both. And you always kind of end up making these trade-offs between, do I invest more in making the experience great for the end user and get them to insist on our product, or am I investing more in making this really profitable for distributors, whether or not the end user loves it? Another major consideration is really exclusivity versus openness. And every distributor has asked us for exclusivity, like almost everyone. We've never granted it, but it can be a really reasonable thing to do as long as there are appropriate performance metrics, like as long as they commit to hitting a target growth rate. And then one other thing that's just worth considering in your strategy, if you are an IoT company, which I presume a lot of people here at least are part of or interested in, you can use IoT elements of your product to track distributors' performance. Like we use a lot of our automated, we use a lot of our sensors in our online system to measure things like how well are distributors stocking our machines, how frequently are they servicing, and just kind of measure overall engagement and see how well they're representing a brand. And then just to wrap up, you can actually build those metrics into your contracts as well as just like into your verbal agreements, whether they're contractual or not. So it's something I'd consider. Other points just to end on, I'd highly recommend if you're getting started in distribution, these are kind of like lessons learned for us that we're now retroactively applying to our business. I'd highly recommend keeping term length short, meaning like if you're not sure what you're going to do with your business model or your pricing, probably not a good idea to lock it in for like 5 or 10 years with a distributor. Another thing is to just be really, really careful about what happens when a contract ends. Like if you're really excited to sign someone big, you may not think about the worst case scenario of like what has to physically happen to all our machines if we cancel this deal. Like how do we get them back? What happens to the client relationships? Like there's a lot to work out. And sometimes when you're just excited to grow, you're not really thinking about those worst case scenarios. And then here are 2 areas where candidly like we messed up, and we're now going back as we work on future products, we're going back and trying to reincorporate these lessons. But we didn't establish our market price thinking of distributors. Like we established it when we were going to market directly and thinking about like doing everything ourselves and what margin we would need. But if you're going to market through distributors, you need to build in their margin too. And I do think we'd be like growing faster today and have more of that distributor push if we had kind of baked in those margins in advance. And then probably most importantly, when we now do a product requirements document for a hardware product, we have a huge section just on distributor requirements, thinking through everything from like what kind of warehouses do they have, what kind of trucks or vans are they transporting our product in, what kind of skill sets do their technicians have, and how do we design our machines to match those skill sets. So the same way you would do these like really detailed customer requirements for a hardware product, we're now learning we have to do for distributors as well. And anyway, those are the lessons learned. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean. That was fantastic. We have time for a couple quick questions. Oh, we got one in the back.
Thank you. How do you do the first sale, and how do you convince your first customer?
So the question was how to convince the first customer to get the product. Our probably first 5 or 10 customers all came through personal relationships. It was really like begging people I knew to take our product at a discounted rate. And even in terms of pricing, like we would really just kind of throw out numbers, and sometimes I would throw out something high and I was embarrassed and thought like, I feel guilty, and then people would like take it in a second. And other times I would quote low and just, yeah, really just trial and error and then begging friends.
Awesome. One more quick one. Anyone? Good question? I have a question. So on the technician piece and the services scaling, was there any part of the early strategy to try to teach folks that were buying Bevi to fix it themselves, or was it just too complicated of a service problem, as some way to kind of scale it so you're either teaching them or you're enabling them to kind of keep it running?
We've explored self-service from the start, and something like even like 4 hours ago, I was in a conversation at work about self-service and how to build toward that. So it's something we eventually want to do, and we have done pilots of it before with some success, but we found that in general, our current product just isn't designed for like wide-scale self-service. And we are interested in designing for that though in the future.
Awesome. Well, Sean, thank you so much for coming back to Hardwired. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.